Everybody happy to make a start? Okay. Right. Okay. Make a start if we can. I just want to do a very quick introduction. Well, first of all, to say thank you everybody for joining us. This is a very much an experimental event tonight. What started out as in our minds as a one-off, kind of expanded, and we thought, we'd like to bring all the lodges in throughout the world, and that's exactly what's happened. So we've got people from the UK, obviously, the American lodges, Houston, and I think someone said Dallas. We've got some Boca, Atlanta, which is a fantastic. We've got some from South Africa. We're very pleased to see Avron, who is the president of the governing lodge. Hi, Avron, and Stan, who's around somewhere, who's the secretary. We've got from Israel. We've got people in. So it really is an international affair, and I'm delighted to see everybody. For those who are not aware of what the Hebrew Order of David is, the order traces its roots back to around about 1896 in England. And it was started in South Africa around about 1904 by a British immigrant. It flourished in South Africa, all but died out in the UK until it was resurrected in 1995 by South African immigrants back into the UK. And then the order went across the Atlantic to the US. There are now 10 lodges in the US, and my understanding is that they are doing fantastically well. The aim of the order is primarily friendship and support to our fellow members, and fundraising for charitable causes, both Jewish and non-Jewish causes. Here in the UK, one of the charities we support is called Zichron Menachem. You may have heard of it. It's an Israeli charity that provides respite and support to children with cancer and to their families. We host them every second year. They come to the UK, and it's a wonderful occasion. We've got a bar mitzvah project. The aim of the project is to help boys and girls from financially distressed families to have a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, which they would otherwise not be able to afford. I'm sorry. The lodges in South Africa, Israel, and the US have their own projects, and I'm sure that wherever you are, if you want to get in touch with the nearest lodge to you, they will be delighted to speak to you, tell you what they do, and invite you to come along and take a look. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker tonight, which is Rabbi Dr. Leon Weisberg. Leon has spent a lifetime in education, specifically Jewish education. He regularly takes adults and young folk on educational journeys around the globe. I've personally accompanied him on 2 of his trips, both times to Krakow and Auschwitz. The second trip was part of the March of the Living, and for those of you who've been on the march, you'll know what a profound experience that is. For those of you who have not yet been, do yourself a favor, sign up for it as soon as you can, and soon as they're able to do it. Unfortunately, this year it was postponed. But Leon is not just an academic. Leon knows how to rock. New Year's Eve at the Billy Joel concert in Miami with Leon and his lovely wife Tony was a blast. And when it comes to a silent disco, Leon, first man in, last man out. I'm going to hand over to Leon now. Any questions you have you'd like to submit, please put them in writing in the chat sidebar. Leon will pick you up and give you his response. Okay, Leon, take it away.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen, that's not the bio that I sent you to read. I sent you different things, but that's okay. You sent it to everyone on the flyer. But yes, we did party nicely on the ship on New Year's Eve. At any rate, it really is a pleasure to be with all of you here today. This kind of international gathering, which is really very, very special. And I'm thrilled to have been asked to present this to you. As we go through this, there's going to be a PowerPoint. I'm going to bring up the screen in a few minutes. We're going to be discussing the American presidents and the Jews. And needless to say, as we go through this, each of the presidents, we could spend about 30, 45 minutes on each president and expand on all of that. But that's not what we're going to do, okay? We're going to kind of give, hopefully I'll give each of you an idea of what the perception of that president was with regard to Jews. And in some cases, we'll embellish and actually spend a little time because of the nature of that president and the Jewish community during his term of office. And hopefully we'll get through all 45 presidents. Which is a significant number of people. Some will be very, very short because there was very little to be discussed, and others, of course, will be a little bit more profound. So that's what I hope to do. Those of you that have questions, again, you'll do the chat, and I'll try to pick up the chat periodically. I may not do it after each president, but as I see the chat pop up, I will try to do that. So let me pull up my screen and get that in place. Okay, and can everyone, hopefully everyone can see the screen. If not, please tell David that you can't see the screen. The first one has a picture of George Washington. Everybody recognizes him because he's on the $1 bill. And so that, for those of you who have access to the $1 bill, you know that. One of the things that we start, of course, with our first president, 1789 to 1797. And one of his, he had many things to say about religion, because everything that George Washington did, and this is a very important concept, he understood that he was setting the precedents. Everything that he did was setting a precedent. After him, whatever he does, others will say, well, if that's what he did, if that's the way it goes. Now, there will be changes over the course of the decades, but he sets the precedent. One of the first precedents that he set was 2-term limit. Now, that there was no law, there's nothing written that it's 2 terms, but after the 2nd term, he said, that's enough. It's time for someone else. We can't create a kingdom. We're not doing a king. And if a person stays more than 8 years, then we're looking at a type of a government that's not the kind of government that we wanted. And needless to say, everybody followed that until Franklin Roosevelt. And we'll get to Franklin Roosevelt a little bit later. But here you have George Washington and his concept, of course, to bigotry, no sanction, to persecution, no assistance. And one of his major aides and person who he worked with significantly and very close and was an esteemed advisor was Alexander Hamilton. And we can't talk about the Jewish aspect with George Washington without bringing in Alexander Hamilton. He was basically the chief architect of Washington's policies and administration. A very important player. For those of you who saw Hamilton, the show, needless to say, it's great that they put it together and that unfolded a little bit of the story. Washington sent Hamilton to solicit Chaim Solomon for funds to support the revolution. And from the letters of Chaim Solomon, we have that Hamilton actually greeted him in Hebrew and actually spoke Hebrew on many occasions with him. So how does Hamilton know Hebrew? Many of you may know this. But Hamilton, of course, studied in a Jewish school in his home in Nevis, where he was raised. And he spent a good 7-8 years in that school until his 13th birthday, when they officially actually bar mitzvahed him, and then he left the school. So we have a connection with Alexander Hamilton and the Jewish world. And needless to say, he brings that into George Washington. He helped to defeat Aaron Burr, who he found to be an unprincipled person, and that helped to elect Jefferson, who he differed philosophically, but needless to say, for him, it was better than Aaron Burr. And of course, one of the aspects of his, to understand Hamilton, I bring this in because of the Jewish piece, Hamilton's mother was Rachel Fawcett, and his father was Yochanan Michal Levian. His father was a religious man. He was a Levi also. And of course, his father abandoned the mother. And left him. We know that story, completely abandoned when Hamilton was just born. And later on, what we have is that Levian comes back because he wants to marry someone, but he can't marry her because he needs a get. And if he gets a get, a divorce, document of divorce from Rachel. Now, the only way she could have given him a get is if she had converted to Judaism to marry him. Because if she was not Jewish, he didn't need a get from her. So that's why when we see these little pieces, we start to add it up together and we get an understanding a little bit of Alexander Hamilton. George Washington's famous visit to Newport, Rhode Island, and on the morning of August 17th, he went to visit the synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island, which was really a wonderful feat for the first president to go visit a synagogue. He brought with him the Secretary of State, the governor of New York, U.S. Supreme Court Justice, and a congressman to visit this particular synagogue. And it was really quite the moment, quite the event. And also, again, setting a precedent for other presidents to follow him. And he writes a letter to the congregations of the Hebrew congregation of Newport. And I'll just show you the bold parts. But in the bold part here, what he says is, I shall always retain grateful remembrance of the cordial welcome I experienced on my visit to Newport from all classes of citizens. And then the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it on all occasions their effort, their effectual support. And finally, he writes, may the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. And that kind of set a policy, the beginning of a policy. And needless to say, the country didn't always follow that and didn't always pursue those goals, but he pretty much set the tone for that. And that was an important precept that George Washington put in place. There's a lot more we could say about George, but we need to move on to the second president of the United States, John Adams. And John Adams was a Federalist. You see the years there, he only served one term. And he saw Jews as an ancient people who, by enunciating monotheism, laid the groundwork for Christianity. So he really admired them. And Voltaire, who was a major anti-Semite in France and in his writings also, he writes, Adams writes about Voltaire, how is it possible that he should represent the Hebrews in such a contemptible light? They are the most glorious nation that ever inhabited this earth. The Romans in their empire were but a bauble in comparison of the Jews. They have given religion to 3/4 of the globe and have influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, ancient or modern. So, you know, so you see a tremendous positive attitude. And by the way, that phrase, and the reason I copied that, because Mark Twain in 1896, he's going to write a whole essay about the Jews, and he literally pulls from John Adams' phrase into his essay about the Jews. One of the major supporters of Adams was Mordechai Emanuel Noah, who maintained a correspondence with the president. And in a speech at the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in New York, Noah focused on the universal history of persecution and indicating that when the Jewish people were reestablished in their own land and self-governance, could they live free of oppression. And he sent a copy of this to the president, who basically appreciated what he sent him and claimed it. For those of you who are familiar with a little bit about Mordechai Emanuel Noah, he really believed also that there needs to be a place for Jews to call their own. And he was like one of the first Zionists in America. The third president here that we deal with, of course, is Thomas Jefferson, who was a Democratic Republican. That was the name of the party then. It was Democratic Republican. And he served 2 terms. And he named Reuben Etting of Baltimore as the U.S. Marshal for Maryland. That was like the first appointed position in the country. Virginia became the first state to grant religious and political freedom to all. Of course, Virginia was Jefferson's state. He frequently quoted John Locke's argument that neither pagan, nor Mohammedan, nor Jew ought to be excluded from the civil rights of the Commonwealth because of his religion. And it wasn't that Jefferson favored Judaism, but he believed that the free flow of ideas would in time lead to the triumph of Christianity over Judaism. Let the Jews express themselves, let them come to learn, and eventually they will become Christian. And that was, Thomas Jefferson's perspective. And with that, he befriended the Jews. Our fourth president, James Madison, was the first president to appoint a Jew to a diplomatic post. And the same guy from before, Mordechai M. Noah, he's still around. He sent him to Tunis to be the ambassador for the United States in Tunis. That's in North Africa on the northeastern coast of North Africa. And Noah, of course, was the most influential Jew in the U.S. in the early 19th century. Was really a significant person. If you ever have a chance to Google him, his biography on the United States, he really believed that the Jews, someone needs to unmute. He really believed that the Jews needed their own place. He was like a prelude to Herzl, who believed that the Jews needed their own state. And he actually purchased 17,000 acres in upstate New York and called it Ararat. And he believed that all the Jews should start to come there, and they would create their own state, their own area, a utopian Zionist territory. Needless to say, it didn't really work. Many Jews just didn't go there, and he just found that it wasn't the right thing to do. At the same time, the Secretary of State, James Monroe, pulled him from his Tunisian post and said that his religion was an obstacle to the exercise of consular functions, particularly in a country which was basically Islam, not Muslim. Now we have three together. There wasn't much. James Monroe, really, we don't have a lot about James Monroe. If anything, nothing bad, but nothing significant that stands out. John Quincy Adams, of course, who is the first son of a president. John Adams, the second president. This is his son, John Quincy Adams, also a Democratic Republican. And immediately, for him, immediately upon entering the White House, Adam, like his father, had written to Major Mordechai Noach, again, Noach is still around, in the first year of his presidency, that he believed in rebuilding of Judea as an independent nation in Palestine. And he actually writes a letter. This thing that you're doing in Ararat is not right. The Jews need to be going to Palestine. And he writes this incredible letter to Noach about Palestine. So here we have the first president that kind of puts that into place, that the homeland of the Jewish people should be Palestine. Andrew Jackson, many of you may know, I mean, there's not a lot of wonderful things to be said about Andrew Jackson. A lot of people, as a matter of fact, his picture is coming off the $20 bill and will be replaced by Harriet Tubman. The Native Americans in the United States have nothing but disdain for him. When there was a meeting of a couple of the Native American tribes with President Reagan, they indicated to him that they would not enter the White House so long as Andrew Jackson's portrait was in the front lobby of the White House. And so Reagan did take down his portrait, and it has not been put back up so that they would come and meet with him. So there's a lot of issues with him. He did befriend a lot of the Southern Jewish slaveholders. They did support him very much so. And coming from Tennessee, he was the first. By the way, Jackson is also the first president who's not a member of the Virginian cohort, if you will. He'll be the first president who's not from that ilk, not from that particular group of people. So that's another unique thing about Jackson. We go to the 8th president of the United States, Martin Van Buren, and he's the first president to order an American consul. And this was this is really quite fascinating, because he orders the American consul to intervene on behalf of the Jews abroad. In 1840, he instructed the US consul in Alexandria, Egypt, to use his good offices to protect the Jews of Damascus, who were under attack because of the blood libel ritual, the belief that they were using blood in their matzahs in order to make matzahs. And of course, here in Egypt, it wasn't that they were taking the blood of Christian children. Here, they were taking the blood of Muslim children, and they were making matzah with their blood. You all have heard of the blood libels, which were in the 15th century and 14th century in Europe, primarily in England, but here it's picked up again in Egypt. And he asked the American consul to intervene and help the Jews, who were ultimately freed after tremendous pressure from US, France, and UK. All those Jews who were kept in prison and who were going to be burned at the stake were ultimately freed from there. And that was primarily due to Martin Van Buren. Our 9th president, William Henry Harrison, who at that time, which is of course now it doesn't mean anything, was the oldest president ever elected. In the campaigns against him, his opponents made sure that everybody knew that he was 68 years old, and he was the oldest president that would be elected. And who knows if he'll survive his office? Well, needless to say, if you look at the dates of his term, he was the president from March 4th until April 4th, 1941. Okay. We don't have a lot about him and the Jews because he was only the president for a month. It was March, in those days, by the way, the president took office on March 4th of the year. November was still the election, but it wasn't until March that he took up the office of presidency. Today it's January 20th. But it was very cold. It was blistering cold in Washington on March 4th. And by the way, that date should be 1841, not 1941. Oh, look at that. That's an error. That should be 1841. And it was very cold. And his wife told him to wear his coat and his hat. And he said, no, I'm the president. I've got to be out there. I've got to be strong. Anyhow, he came back after a 2-hour, the longest presidential speech for accepting the office, the longest, in the cold without a coat. And of course, he caught pneumonia, and within the month he died. So that took care of him. One of the things about him, though, one of the things about Harrison is that he did write Tyler, his vice president, on his death, wrote, when a Christian people feel themselves to be overtaken by great public calamity, it becomes to them to humble themselves under the dispensation of the divine providence. And he said, basically, we have to recognize that we all are sympathetic to the death of this man. And a Jew from Washington, Jacob Ezekiel, wrote a letter protesting to Tyler, saying to him, Jews also will, deal with the public calamity. And it's not only Christians that should do this, and it's Jews, which made Tyler rethink the way he approached it and recognizing that there are more than just Christians in America. So that was also an interesting thing as a result of Harrison's death. So Tyler becomes the president on Harrison's death, and he's the 10th president. And of course, he was the first president to nominate a US consul to Palestine. Okay, and this was the first time a Jew, okay, the consul was a Jew who went to, Warwick Preston was a Quaker who converted to Judaism, and he established the first Zionist colony in Palestine as the US consul to Palestine. So here we have the second president who kind of identifies Palestine as something Jewish. And Warden Creston, that's the picture of Creston there, who converted to Judaism and also believed in the Zionist idea. While he was in Palestine, he set up basically an early kibbutz, one of the first early kibbutzim, and things started to move on from that point on. Here we have 3 more presidents who really, other than finances, James K. Polk particularly asked a lot of the Jews that some of his cabinet people knew to help him support the Mexican War. That was for him, the war with Mexico and Manifest Destiny was an important piece for James K. Polk. Zachary Taylor, Millard Fillmore, none of them really are anything that I had time to spend on their Jewish connections, but under them, the Jewish communities in America, particularly in the South, did prosper, did grow, and became very, very wealthy and very significant. Particularly the Reform movement, the Reform community in New York really established themselves as kind of the first Jewish ironclad in the United States, in the Reform movement. And it won't be until the 1880s, 1890s that the vast immigrants that will start to see a shift in denominations in the Jewish culture. But the Reform movement was growing, it was strong. We're not talking about many, many Jews. We're talking about somewhere between these, by Fillmore, there was probably close to 15 to 20,000 Jews in the United States. Along comes Franklin Pierce, and he's the first and only president whose name appears on the charter of a synagogue. Pierce signed the Act of Congress in 1857 that amended the laws of the District of Columbia to enable the incorporation of the city's first synagogue, the Washington Hebrew Congregation. And that's a picture of the congregation there. And he signed their charter. So again, we have a president who recognized that this is an important group and it has value, and he supported it. And the actual signature of the charter is now in the archives in the Library of Congress. James Buchanan comes along. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with American history and James Buchanan, but so far for the last 15 years, when different studies have tried to evaluate which is the worst president the United States has ever had, and usually they wait for past three presidents. In other words, Obama has not been rated, Trump certainly not, because he's the current president, and I think the last Bush was not rated, because they wait till there's, time goes by. But as of now, James Buchanan still holds the title of the worst president ever. And that's, an interesting piece in terms of who he was, what he didn't do for this country. He's the only president who was not married when he was in the White House. And a lot of stories, a lot of elements about him. But one of the most trying pieces is secession of the Civil War was moving on. We're talking about the antebellum period, and the Civil War was imminent. It was imminent. And he was asked by a lot of people, particularly Congress and some of his advisors, to do something to try to prevent the Civil War. South Carolina secedes under his administration. And he basically, after South Carolina seceded in December, he basically said, they shouldn't do that. It's illegal that they do that, but as the president of the United States, there's nothing I can do about it. I have nothing to say and nothing I can do about it. And that was it. That was, there's nothing much else that we can add to. Financially, he didn't know how to master economics. And so James Buchanan left a lot to be desired on a lot of levels. He's followed by Abraham Lincoln. And when Abraham Lincoln takes over in March, remember, not until March of 61, South Carolina has already seceded, and 4 more states have seceded under Buchanan, because Buchanan did nothing to stop South Carolina. So other states began to secede as well. Since it's okay, South Carolina didn't, he didn't bring in troops or anything. Lincoln's first act when he comes in, of course, says that James Buchanan was absolutely wrong. As the president of the United States, of course, there's something I can do about it. And I can send troops to basically arrest everyone who signed all their letters of secession as traitors and treasonous. And we'll arrest them and try them and hang them. So that was Lincoln's attitude.
I'm losing the charge.
Someone's talking. Okay, sorry. So anyhow, but certainly he was a president who interacted with Jews, not only while president, but even before he was a president. He interacted with Jews in Illinois, in everywhere he went. He befriended them, he admired them, he commissioned them, he trusted them, and he defended them. He was the second, and also he's the second American president not to declare himself a member of any particular religious faith. He never went to church. His entire presidency, he never went to church. While he was senator, he never. When he was in Congress, he never went to church. There's no recognition of him ever going to any church. Jefferson's another one who never went to church. He's the first president who never went to church, but he was so early on, you can't say he's the only president. But Lincoln followed suit with that, and he never went to church. So we have a couple of things about Lincoln. The Reverend Arnold Fischler of New York's Congregation Shaarei Israel wanted to become a chaplain. And the Secretary of War, Simon Cameron, complied with the law. There was a law in the United States that only a Christian could be a chaplain in the American Army. And so Fischler's application was rejected. Fischler went to the president. He actually asked for a meeting with the president of the United States, and he had it. And the president petitioned, wrote a bill, sent it to Congress, and Congress adopted Lincoln's proposal to the chaplaincy law to allow the appointment of brigade chaplains of the Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish religion. And so Fischler became the first Jewish chaplain in the American Army, again, because Lincoln helped him to do that. Lincoln and General Grant, there was a big to-do about that. In 1862, in the heat of the Civil War, Grant initiated one of the most blatant official episodes of anti-Semitism in the 19th century American history. General Order Number 11 expelled all Jewish merchants from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi. Now, wherever the army was quartered, remember, we're in the midst of a civil war, we're in the midst of war. So the Jewish merchants followed the Union Army, and wherever they were quartered, they would set up shop. And the soldiers would, when they got paid, they would come, they would buy things from the various Jewish merchants. And when he heard that the Jewish merchants were doing this, and some of the Christian merchants felt They told General Grant that they're competing with us and they're basically getting all of our business, and we would do much better if the Jewish merchants weren't here. So he wrote General Order Number 11, expelling all Jewish merchants. So the Jews as a class, he writes, violating every regulation. And again, this is interesting because he writes, every regulation of trade established by the Treasury Department, and also department orders are hereby expelled from the department and the Department of Tennessee, an administrative district of the Union Army of Occupation composed of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi within 24 hours from the receipt of this order. And then he writes, no passes will be given to these people, I love these people, to visit headquarters for the purpose of making a personal application of trade permits. Well, this was very, this was a demanding order, and certainly focusing on one particular group, the Jews. So a group of Jewish merchants dispatched an indignant telegram to President Lincoln, condemning Grant's order as an enormous outrage on all laws and humanity, the grossest violation of the Constitution and our rights as good citizens under it. And Jewish leaders organized protest rallies in St. Louis, Louisville, Cincinnati, all over. He received a delegation of Jews 2 days after the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed. He studied the copies of General Order Number 11, and he basically told General Halleck to have Grant revoke General Order Number 11. And he writes on his missive that a paper purporting to be General Orders Number 11, issued by you on December 17th, has been presented here. By its terms, it expels all Jews from your department. If such an order has been issued, it will be immediately revoked. And needless to say, the order was revoked and the merchants went back to trading. And so, that's how that unfolded. Rabbi Isaac Wise of Cincinnati, I'm spending some time on Lincoln because there was a lot of Jewish involvement with Lincoln. A delegation led by Rabbi Isaac Wise of Cincinnati, a Reform rabbi, the leader of the Reform movement of the time in America, he called on Lincoln to express its gratitude that the order had been rescinded. And Lincoln received them cordially and basically said to condemn a class is, to say the least, to wrong the good with the bad. And so, that was one of the things. Then there's all this controversy. Was Abraham Lincoln Jewish? There's all this, you may have heard some of these issues about him. Abraham's great-grandfather's name was Mordechai. Lincoln did not have a formal religious affiliation. He was neither raised by the church nor a synagogue or anything. When Abe Lincoln was assassinated, the entire Jewish community in America, all the rabbis in America, declared their congregations to sit shiva. Rabbis all over the country eulogized the fallen president. And Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise, the man who created the Reform Judaism, he said, "Brethren, the lamented Abraham Lincoln believes himself to be bone from our bone and flesh from our flesh. He supposed himself to be a descendant of Hebrew parentage. He said so in my presence." And there we have it. And that's, whether he was Jewish or not, he certainly was very good to the Jewish communities during his term. Andrew Johnson, as you know, took over after Lincoln was assassinated, and there's not much we have to say about Andrew Johnson. He was a unionist. He had his own struggles with impeachment. He had struggles with the Congress. He was a Southerner that Lincoln had put on his ticket with him in order to try to save the Union. He was from Tennessee, and the Congress couldn't stand him. They wanted him out. And that was, a little bit of Andrew Johnson. He's followed by, of course, President Grant, as you know, who did that Order 11. But after the war, Grant transcended his reputation, and he literally carried the Jewish vote in the presidential election of 1868 and named a lot of Jews to high office. Whether he was anti-Semitic or he simply signed an order without fully cognizant, we don't know. But he was a friend to the Jews and Jewish concerns. He was the first president to attend the dedication of a Jewish house of worship. He came to Adas Israel in Washington. He placed American support against the rabid anti-Semitism of Russia, and Jews responded to Grant with overwhelming electoral support. So with everything that one thing that he did, the Jews kind of went past that. He's followed by Rutherford B. Hayes, who was a Republican, first president to designate a Jewish ambassador for the stated purpose of fighting anti-Semitism. He appointed Benjamin Piexoto, the consul general to Romania, where he heard there was so much anti-Semitism going on that he wanted a Jewish ambassador to go in there and do what he could to quell the anti-Semitism in Romania. Hayes was also the first president to assure a civil service employee the right not to work on Shabbat. Well, sorry about that. The first Jewish president, I mean, oh, I forget it, not to work on Shabbat. And that in those days, basically, you know, Sunday was the day of rest, not Saturday. And a lot of people worked in the government on Saturday. This Orthodox woman said she could not work on Saturday, and she was refused the job. She petitioned that was basically anti-Semitic, and she won because the president said, absolutely, if someone says that's their day of rest and they can't work, they can't be forced to work on that day. And then we have a slew of presidents here. Again, small little things, nothing extravagant. Garfield, he appointed Simon Wolf to be the ambassador to Egypt. Simon Wolf took the job because his parents, he was American born, but his parents had come from Egypt, and they had emigrated to the United States from Egypt. And so he went back there and also worked with the plight of the Jews in Egypt in those days. Chester Arthur, Garfield, as you see again, 1881 to 1881. He died in office, and Arthur reappointed Simon. The appointment, Simon Wolf was appointed by Garfield, but the vote had never taken place and his commission had never been officially put forth. And so Arthur did submit his name. Grover Cleveland appointed Oscar Strauss as ambassador to the Ottoman Empire. That would be Turkey. And that was, again, a Jew to be the ambassador to the Islamic Empire. Harrison and Cleveland, again, Cleveland comes back being president again, one more time after that. And then we have William McKinley, who's basically, which is an interesting thing, clicking too fast. His entire cabinet was in attendance at the laying of the cornerstone of the Washington Hebrew congregation. William McKinley told his entire cabinet to be there to show support for the Jewish community of Washington. And when they laid the cornerstone of the Washington Hebrew congregation, he had all of them in attendance at that particular moment. And there's a plaque there. I went there, I've gone there a number of times, and there's a plaque there that attests to that particular member when the entire cabinet of the United States government was in attendance at the laying of this cornerstone. And then we come to Theodore Roosevelt. And for those of you who know, the legacy of Theodore Roosevelt is that we all have teddy bears, because that was, he saved these 3 bear cubs. And because he saved these 3 bear cubs, one of his aides, you know, he was called Teddy by, for those who know him well, and he got these little cubs and they called him Teddy's Cubs, and slowly it became a teddy bear. That's where that expression comes from. But he was the first president to appoint a presidential cabinet position, and Oscar Strauss became Secretary of Commerce and Labor. And Roosevelt was also the first president to contribute his own funds to a Jewish cause. In 1919, when he received the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts against the Russo-Japanese War to settle the war, he contributed part of his prize to the National Jewish Welfare Board. And he was actually very involved with them. They asked him to be on the board of directors, but he declined that honor. They did, he was really tremendously appreciated and well thought of in terms of that group and the Jews of the community. Roosevelt seemed to have a passion for who the Jews were and what they stood for. He's followed by his best friend, William Howard Taft, who of course eventually, for the second, when Taft runs again, Roosevelt's going to come back and run against him because Taft turned around and did everything that Roosevelt didn't want him to do. But Taft did attend a Seder while in office as the president. He was invited to the home of Colonel Harry Cutler, and he was also the first president of the National Jewish Welfare Board. Cutler was, and he invited the president to come to his home in Providence, Rhode Island for a Seder, and Taft did go for a Seder. When he ran a second time for president, at that point in time, Roosevelt came back and ran against him, as well as Wilson. And of course, he split the vote for Taft, and that's how Woodrow Wilson won that campaign, which takes us to Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson, of course, a very famous personage, particularly because of World War I, but he was the first president to nominate a Jew to the United States Supreme Court. And that was really big. He stood firm. He had tremendous pressure to withdraw the nomination. At that point in time, every Supreme Court justice was a Protestant, okay, mainly Episcopalians. And so, of course, this was going to be a major change in this. By the way, the Supreme Court today has no Protestants. They're all different denominations, Jews, Catholics, but no Protestants. And Wilson insisted that he knew no one better qualified, of course, than Louis Brandeis. And he nominated him, and the Senate affirmed him, and he became the first Jewish Supreme Court justice. And Wilson was also the first president to publicly endorse the National Jewish Philanthropic Campaign. In a letter to Jacob Schiff, Wilson called for wide support of the United Jewish Relief Campaign, which was basically federation and all those beginning of those campaigns, and particularly to raise funds for the European war relief. That may have been Wilson's agenda, but he publicly claimed that the efforts and the work of the United Jewish Relief was absolutely wonderful, and he supported and he asked everyone to contribute to the Jewish Relief Campaign. Woodrow Wilson, as you know, was also governor of New Jersey before that, and he was the president of Princeton College. So he was the only president with a PhD to date. There's been no president with a PhD since Woodrow Wilson. And of course, World War I was a tremendous piece of it. His greatest failure for himself was the inability to get the Senate to support the League of Nations and to support the Versailles Treaty. Everything that he did in Europe to try to end the war, to go post-war to prevent another war, the US did not affirm that in the Senate, and so we were never part of that. He's followed by Warren G. Harding, who signed a joint congressional resolution endorsing the Balfour Declaration. As many of you remember, November 1919 was the Balfour Declaration in Britain declaring that Palestine was a place for a homeland for the Jews. And Harding actually endorsed it. He endorsed the Balfour Declaration and the Palestine Mandate supporting the establishment in Palestine. So he becomes the third president who supports the idea of Jews in Palestine. And the resolution was signed in 1922, and that's one of the major pieces in terms of Jewish that Harding provided for the Jews of this country and of course the Jews of the world. He's followed by Calvin Coolidge, the first president to participate in the dedication of a Jewish community institution that was not a house of worship, and that would be the JCC. And that's a picture of the JCC, of the Washington, D.C. JCC. And again, he dedicated the cornerstone, and that once again is a big step for a president to be a part of that activity. We move up to Herbert Hoover, and as much as everyone thinks Herbert Hoover and the Depression, which rightly so, although the Depression actually occurs, right at the beginning, at the end of his term, and Roosevelt's the one who has to deal with all the issues of the Depression. He's not remembered as having much interaction with Jews, but one of the things that really is important about him, he in fact played a significant role in aiding Jewish communities devastated by World War I. When I was in Poland, in Warsaw, in the downtown area, there's a square, and as we were walking, I saw this sign, Hoover Square. And I said, what is this about? And I asked one of my Polish colleagues, what's this Hoover Square? And they said, are you kidding? We love Herbert Hoover. Right after the end of World War I, Poland was starving. There was no food anywhere to be had. And Herbert Hoover sent over something like 1 million tons of wheat and whatever commodities from the United States to Poland. And they dedicated a square for him to remember that how he helped the people of Poland. So, and then with him also became this whole idea of a Jewish vote. He supported the cause of a Jewish state, despite, again, the State Department told him not to say that anywhere in public, that he supports the Balfour Declaration and a Jewish state. Look at the years, 29 to 33. And 29 was the big pogrom in Jerusalem by the Mufti against the Jews in Jerusalem. But he actually also promoted the rescue of the Jews. In 33, he tried to help Jews begin, the ones who were beginning to look to leave Germany. And even during the war, while he was alive, he actually created all kinds of routes for Jews to leave Poland and Germany and come to the United States illegally. So he played a major part in that. So that's something that we have to remember about Hoover. And of course, he played a key part in this concept. Before him, there was no such idea as the Jewish vote. And he really went out there to get the Jewish vote. It wasn't enough for him to win in 33, but it became a new thing. And everybody started looking at this Jewish vote. Of course, he's succeeded by Franklin Roosevelt. He's the first president to be given a Torah as a gift. He received a miniature Torah from Young Israel and another that had been rescued from a burning synagogue in Czechoslovakia. And 56 years after Roosevelt's death, the arguments continue after Roosevelt. I just did a paper actually on how critical was Roosevelt's decision not to blow up Auschwitz, that kind of the decision that went around that. It's very controversial, but regardless of that, you still have a tremendous Jewish vote that supported Roosevelt and supports his Democratic Party. The headline in Yiddish, for those of you who may know some Yiddish, Favus Meir Darfin Steinman Fair Roosevelt. And of course, why we should vote for Roosevelt. That was in the foreword. And all the Jewish organizations kept writing why we must support Roosevelt and we must continue our support for Roosevelt and subsequently for the Democratic Party. And that started to happen very, very much so. Harry Truman, I think everybody here knows, he was the first, he recognized the state of Israel. 11 minutes after Ben-Gurion declared the state, he sent out a press statement, the United States recognizes the provisional government as the de facto authority of the new state of Israel. And of course, he was also the first president, needless to say, to receive a president of Israel, Chaim Weizmann in 1948, and the ambassador from Israel, Eliyahu Eilat in 48. And with Israel staggering under the burdens of mass immigration, Truman obtained from Congress close to $140 million in loans and grants for the state. So that was the first funding by the government of the state of Israel, came from President Truman. We move forward now to Dwight Eisenhower, who was also the first president to participate in a coast-to-coast TV program sponsored by a Jewish organization. It was a network show in '54 celebrating the 300th anniversary of the American Jewish community. They came to New York, New Amsterdam in 1654. 21 Jews from Recife, that's a misspelling, sorry, Recife, Brazil. And so that's how long the Jews have been in this area. And of course, it was the 300th anniversary. He participated in the program. He said that it was one of the enduring satisfactions of his life that he was privileged to lead the forces of the free world, which finally crushed the brutal regime in Germany, freeing the remnants of Jews for a new life and hope in Israel. By the way, when he got to Germany, one of the things that Roosevelt did when he saw the devastation of the camps and when he saw the emaciated inmates and the piles of dead bodies, he told his photographer, because his photographer was not taking any pictures. He said, "We can't take pictures of this, it's terrible." He says, "You take a picture of all of this." And he said, "No one's gonna believe this after it's all cleaned up, go 2-3 decades from now, no one's gonna believe this ever happened." And so he instructed his photographer to take all these pictures. And the second thing he did is in every community where there was a concentration camp or a death camp where there were bodies, he required the Germans in the civilian populations around that camp to come and bury the dead bodies, to actually pick them up, take them and put them into these pits of graves. So he really wanted, to make sure that they understood what had been done here. So that's General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, who's followed, of course, by John F. Kennedy, who named 2 Jews to his cabinet, Abraham Ribicoff and Arthur Goldberg. And Kennedy was the only president for whom a National Jewish Award was named. The annual Peace Award of the Synagogue Council of America was renamed the John F. Kennedy Peace Award after his assassination in 1963. And John Kennedy also, of course, we all know he's the first Catholic president. So he certainly had an affinity for Jews because he was in a minority group in America, and he understood the role of being a minority, and particularly running for president when his Catholicism was brought up as a reason not to vote for him. We continue on now to his successor, of course, after he was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson, who, by the way, you have to understand, Lyndon Johnson is probably one of the greatest men who became an American president who really helped Jews. While serving as a young congressman in 38 and 39, he arranged for visas. People don't know this. He's one of the righteous Gentiles, which people don't know, to be supplied to Jews in Warsaw. He oversaw the illegal immigration of Jews to the port of Galveston. He saved at least 400 to 500 Jews illegally while he was a congressman. Well, you know, and again, he didn't make a point of it. Nobody, but if you really read the biography of LBJ, you see these are some of the things that he did. During his presidency, the U.S. became Israel's chief diplomatic ally and primary arms supplier. LBJ funded Israel significantly, and he was absolutely a friend of the Jews throughout all this. His aunt, Jessie Johnson Hatcher, a major influence on him, was a member of the Zionist Organization of America. His Aunt Jessie had nurtured his commitment to befriending Jews for 50 years. He knew her for 50 years. And as a young boy, Lyndon watched his politically active grandfather, Big Sam, and his father, Little Sam, seek clemency for Leo Frank. Remember, I don't know how many of you remember the Leo Frank story in Atlanta, the Jewish victim of a blood libel in Atlanta. He was accused of having raped a white girl and killing her. Of course, he hadn't, but, both Johnson's father and grandfather were fighting to get him out of that jail and rescue him. And of course, he was lynched. And then that takes us to Richard Nixon. The Jews are, and of course, Richard Nixon is not known for being a friend of the Jews. He definitely supported Israel. And again, there's no question about that. But his comments throughout, of course, he did make Henry Kissinger his Secretary of State, and that was very important. But he did say Jews are all over the government. He said that Jews need to be brought under control. We need to put someone in charge who is not Jewish in the various key agencies. He wrote, Washington is full of Jews. Most Jews are disloyal. But generally speaking, you can't trust the bastards. They turn on you. Am I wrong or right? He said to Bob Haldeman. That was from one of his tapes, by the way. So we wouldn't know that if it wasn't for the tapes. He does stand out among presidents for taking the boldest risk for Israel as much needed arms airlift during the 73 Yom Kippur War. And he did support Israel, funding them and sending military material. But he was not enamored of the Jews, despite Henry Kissinger, who, you know, he trusted tremendously. Of course, he resigned, and the only president who was never elected as the vice president, was never elected to be president, becomes the president of the United States. And he did say America must and will pursue friendship with all nations, but this will never be done at the expense of America's commitment to Israel. A strong Israel is essential to a stable peace in the Middle East. So what we have now more is the president's commitments to Israel and how strong, you know, providing Israel security. And Gerald Ford continued that trend of supporting Israel financially and militarily. He's followed by Jimmy Carter, who stated his concern for human rights. Although since his presidency, Jimmy Carter has not been a very big friend of Israel or the Jews, but while he was president, he did stress the right of Jews to emigrate out of Russia. He's credited with being the person responsible for the first Camp David Accords, you can see that with Egypt and Israel. And early in his administration, he did call for a Palestinian homeland, the farthest any president ever gone in supporting Palestinian nationalism. So he did support the idea of Palestine having a homeland, the Palestinian Arabs, that is, having a homeland. But he did, of course, have this very famous picture that we all recognize. He was also the first president who officially recognized Hanukkah, when in '79 he walked from the White House to Lafayette Park to deliver brief remarks as he lit the new national menorah erected by Chabad Lubavitch. By the way, Chabad Lubavitch and the Chabad Jewish community were basically screamed at by all the Jewish communities that were conservative, the reform. They said, how dare you do that? It can't be done. It's separation of church and state. You have no right to do that. Anyhow, they did it. And since then, there's been a menorah at the White House ever since, every year. It reflected the growing influence of Jews in American politics. And in his one term in office, he appointed 4 Jews to his cabinet: Harold Brown for defense, Michael Blumenthal for treasury, Neil Goldschmidt at transportation, and Philip Klutznick at commerce. So they served in senior roles as well as being cabinet secretaries. Ronald Reagan follows him, number 40, a Republican, and he resigned from the Lakeside Country Club in Los Angeles because its refusal to permit a Jew to take out membership. When he heard that, he resigned from the club. In 67, he strongly supported Israel during the Six-Day War. And by the way, he was also called, when he was the president of the Actors Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, during the McCarthy era. He was subpoenaed to come, and he really protested the McCarthy's attack on the Jews and attack on Hollywood, as you very well know what happened with all that. But he was an advocate for trying to waylay McCarthy. He supported the liberation of Ethiopian Jews and on a policy on Israel. A strong Israel is the only remaining strategic asset in the region on which we can rely. Opposition to the terrorist PLO and rejection of the notion of a PLO state, and certainly a strong support for Israel. And of course, he also lit the Chanukiah, this time not at Lafayette Park, but he lit it in the White House. And he had Chabad Lubavitch come into the White House to light the Chanukiah. George H.W. Bush, 89 to 93, vice president, played a personal role in Operation Joshua, the airlift that brought 10,000 Jews out of Ethiopia. He was very dramatically involved in that behind the scenes. People don't know that how much the United States supported the idea, supported Israel, and helped fund that whole movement of Ethiopian Jews to Israel. In 91, he played a critical role in Operation Solomon, another 14,000 Ethiopians leaving Ethiopia. And he also got the UN to revoke its 1975 Zionism is racism resolution. And he had them repeal that. However, he received no more than 12% of the Jewish vote in the 92 election. And of course, that cost him the election, which in 88, he had gotten 35%, and in 92, only 12%. So certainly there were issues. But again, the whole Operation Joshua and Solomon was kept secret. Nobody knew of his involvement in that. Which leads us to Bill Clinton, who appointed more Jews to his cabinet than all of the previous presidents put together. He appointed 2 justices of the Supreme Court who were Jewish, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer. His daughter married a Jew, and the child, I think they did a conversion at the bris. You see here Arafat, of course, and Rabin, thank you. And of course, he went to Israel for the Rabin funeral. And of course, his famous speech where he said, Shalom Chaver. That was, something that everybody remembered very, very much about Bill Clinton. Taking us now to the son of, this is the second son and father team. By the way, the Harrisons was a grandfather and grandson team. And he was the first president since Hoover who had no Jews in his cabinet at all. Many Jews as various department heads. Josh Bolten, I'm sure you've all heard of Josh Bolten. Some of you may even have ordered his book. Chief of Staff Ari Fleischer, the White House press secretary. Of course, with Ehud Olmert, he met with Ehud Olmert. He met with Ariel Sharon. I mean, he certainly supported Israel, but we don't see any major connections with him and the Jewish community per se. He did mark the first year a Hanukkah lamp was lit in the White House residence. The president and first lady commemorated the holiday by participating with members of their staff and some of their children in lighting the second candle on December 10th in 2001 in the White House. Taking us to Barack Obama, which of course also lit the candles for Hanukkah, and that became a tradition now. He definitely had Rahm Emanuel as his chief of staff, who's now the mayor of Chicago. And he was a keynote speaker at the AIPAC conference and really wooed the crowd. He had 21 Jews in his administration, and he committed the U.S. to $38 billion in military assistance over the decade, the largest such aid package in U.S. history. As much as a lot of people thought that Obama was anti-Israel and against Israel, he definitely was pro trying to engage the Islamic countries and make friends with them and try to create them, but never at the expense of Israel. He definitely always supported Israel. All the military he gave, never stopped any military money going to them, and certainly never stopped any connections that the United States has with Israel. Which leads us to the current president of the United States, who is 74 at this time. And he did issue an executive order. This is very recent. I don't know if you know this. In 2016, he got 24% of the Jewish vote. He issued an executive order reiterating that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act protects Jews from discrimination at taxpayer-funded universities. And that had to do with BDS and all those kinds of things that were happening. So he made an executive order that if Jews are discriminated at a university, they risk losing their federal funding. And of course, just recently, this is about 2 weeks ago, the Never Again Holocaust Education Act was approved by bipartisan, both houses of Congress, and he signed it to make sure that every state is now teaching Holocaust education, because that seems to be very weak. There's only 17 states in the country that actually have that mandated in their curriculum. You all know his daughter married Jared Kushner, and she converted, and he has a Jewish grandchild, Arabella, and so that certainly is part of it. You also know that one of the things he did was move the embassy to Jerusalem and declare Jerusalem the capital of the state of Israel, which of course endeared him very much to Netanyahu and to Israel. And that also has become a big thing for Israel. He's the first president to have actually gone to the Kotel and touched the Kotel and offered a prayer at the Kotel. No one has ever done that before. And the latest piece of this attempt to garner the Jewish vote and to gain access to Jews, and possibly his endearment to this, is Israel has dedicated a new development in the Golan Heights, and it's called Ramat Trump Heights. And it's a new development. It can house 600 families, and they are now looking to populate it. And actually, there's a waiting list. It's a waiting list. The housing is very, very economical. It's in the Golan, and it really is the newest vestige of President Trump. And of course, so we see that his support of the Jewish vote, of Israel, has been very positive. It would be unfair now, because we are in a political world, not to also mention Joe Biden. For those of you who know, we certainly don't know. His age is 77. And of course, he says criticism of Israel's policy is not anti-Semitic, but too often that criticism from the left morphs into anti-Semitism. He's definitely a supporter of Israel. With his centrist takes on I'm sorry, I'm hitting the wrong button. With his centrist takes on U.S.-Israel relations and strong anti-Semitism messages, the presumptive Democratic nominee looks like a shoo-in with older Jewish voters. But how will he win over younger voters whose hearts belong to Bernie Sandler, another Jew, who also, has been part of what's been going on here in this country for the last year and a half. So that's what I've tried to offer you here is a little insight, perhaps, into all these presidents, who they are, what they are, what they speak for. It's an encapsulation, very, very brief, but I think we have a picture that basically in America, Jews have had an opportunity to live Jewish lives in a very good sense. There are many of those, particularly in the Orthodox community. We hear this repeatedly, that this is the greatest country that Jews have lived in probably Jewish history, based on their freedoms, their abilities to be whatever kind of Jew they want to be, practice or not practice, whatever they want to do. And so we've had that very positive outlook of this country, and that's been very important. Okay, so I've got I got 19 questions here. All right, let's see. Actually, yes, there are a number of books. If you just Google Amazon for presidents and the Jews, you'll see about 4 or 5 books. Of the presidents since the creation of Israel, what have each of them done to go beyond helping provide finance? To go beyond, well, I think I shared that with you as we went through this. They, since the state of Israel, every one of them has not gone above and beyond, but many of them have, and enough of them that enough of them that it really has been a support of Israel. Can't stop. The chief of staff must be one of the most powerful. Yes, and there have been many of them this term under this president. I can't stop it. There have been many of them under this president. And it is absolutely the most powerful. It's the avenue to the president. Nobody can see the president without going through the chief of staff. He manages the president's time, the president's agenda, and it is the most powerful position. Oh, okay. You are Roz. Oh, Roz Jacobs. Hi, I didn't see you there. Oh, it's so my cousin Roz and my cousin Harold is on this. Roz is in New York and sometimes France. Harold's in Israel. Thanks, Roz. What about Trump's support of anti-Jewish organizations early on the? Well, you all know that yourself. It's not for me to comment on that. Is he trying just to get the name on? The president is up for re-election. It's going to be a little bit of a tough fight. There's a lot of issues that's happened, particularly with Corona. And, it's not just the Jewish vote. The Jewish vote is not the majority vote in this country. The Jews only represent about 2% of the United States. The challenge, of course, for others about the Jewish vote is that the Jewish vote, the Jews come out to vote in the largest percentage of any single group. So there's a block, there's a strong block. But right now, the last election, 70% of the Jewish vote votes Democrat. So, we'll see where, if anything has changed. I think he's done a lot of Israel activities to try to get that Jewish vote. But they're all big. And of course, it also depends what state. As you know, Florida. The election sits on Florida. We've had a lot of issues with how Florida votes. So goes the whoever the winner will be. And Florida has, right now, South Florida is the second largest Jewish population in America. We bypassed LA about 5 years ago. So New York is the first, and now South Florida, the 3 counties in South Florida, are the second largest Jewish population, 700,000 Jews. So that's a significant number. Thank you. Excellent. I'm looking for another question. Can you elaborate on the influence of Henry Kissinger? On Ford, 100%. There's no question. Ford relied on Henry Kissinger completely. Ford didn't have a clue what was going on. He was kept out of all cabinet meetings. He didn't know anything. Nixon relied on Kissinger, I would say 70% of the time. He relied on his other aides also, but you have to understand how influential the State Department is. The State Department is very, very powerful. It was the State Department that kept the St. Louis out, not Roosevelt. The State Department is the one who convinced Roosevelt that you can't let any of the Jews get off the ship to St. Louis when it was off the port of Miami. It was the State Department that has so much influence over the president, really, really does. And Kissinger did have that influence. Very educated, thank you. The issue of anti-Semitism has for decades continues to be pervasive in the Department of, yes, I'm gonna say that the State Department, until Clinton, was a very anti-Semitic State Department. Their Near East desk was only manned by people who either had family that came from Arab countries or were connected to Arab countries. I mean, it really is very anti-Semitic. It's modified its stance in the last, since Clinton, somewhat. We've seen a modification. But before that, there's no question that the State Department was anti-Semitic. Thank you. Okay, I think I got them all. Okay, then I thank you all very much for being so receptive, for listening, for being patient with me, with my little glitches with the computer. And Stephen, I turn it back to you.
Thanks, Leon. That was a wonderful, wonderful talk. I'm actually going to turn it over to my good friend Edwin, who's the president of our lodge number 1 here in London, to offer a vote of thanks. So Edwin, take it away.
Rabbi Dr. Weisberg, when Stephen recommended that we ask you to speak, he was very confident that this would be a wonderful experience and that we'd learn a tremendous amount. And I must say that you have far exceeded any expectation I had. I think you're a wonderful educator. Your students must have been thoroughly enriched by their experience with you over the years. And I must wish you every success in future education and future educative talks and events. You've given us this wonderful tour through American history, and I really feel somewhat enlightened. It is interesting. I'm based in London, and it's interesting to just contrast the difference between the US and Canada to what we experience in Europe generally. And it really is something to reflect on. So you've also had an honor this evening, which is that this is the first time we've actually run an international lecture, which is meant for all the lodges internationally, their friends, their family, and so on. And really, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. We always have food at events. So I hope you found the catering to be good and you enjoyed it. But nevertheless, one day when you're in one of our cities, please make contact. You could always speak to Stephen or myself, and we'd really love to welcome you and feed you. So,
Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it, and I'm glad I was part of this unique premiere event. And hopefully, and God willing, you'll have many more of these, and that will be very nice.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great. And Leon, also say hi to Tony from us all and send her out love.
Absolutely, I will do that, of course.
Okay.
And, just a final word, if I may, just for those of you who've attended this lecture who are not part of HOD, one can think of it as a channel through which you can connect to Jewish community and do good deeds, have a part, whether it's actively, physically, or just with money, where you can have a positive influence on Jewish community. And at the same time, you can enjoy Chavashaft. You can be among fellow Jews who have similar objectives. So if anyone is interested, please contact somebody who's a member, and we'd love to have you. Thank you very much.
I just got to give a